Good evening, welcome to Bon Moths Presents Moths Ado About Nothing.
Moths Ado About Nothing. Moths Ado About Nothing.
Where we apply the revolutionary Moths scale to classic and contemporary literature.
Moths Ado About Nothing. Moths Ado About Nothing.
This podcast contains mature content, spoilers, language. You have been warned.
Hello there, welcome back to Lost Signals Discusses and Reviews Literature. Tonight we're going to do a short story that is called How to Get Back to the Forest by Sofia Samatar. I believe I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. If not, I apologize. Which appeared in Lightspeed magazine in 2014. I, of course, remain your host for this evening, Scott Thurlow, and I'm here with Jonathan Ian Manzer.
And I remain your re-education camp counselor.
Indeed. And also Stephen Amosi.
The story nearly made me vomit.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of that, we're going to toss it to E for the funny logline for this story.
The benefits of bulimia in banishing bugs.
Correct. And you'll see why that makes sense shortly. And E, you can continue with the plot.
So, a woman reminisces about her life in a re-education, or I suppose education camp in a dystopian future, and remembers her manic pixie dream girl
best friend
C, who rebelled against this society and the bugs that supposedly are implanted in everyone. And so you're taken through the basic mystery part one, like setting up this kind of world and slowly piecing together what's going on in it. The second part really starts to delve into answering a lot of the questions, but not all of them.
Flushes out the dystopia.
And the third is the future where the protagonist is, she's reflecting on this girl C the entire time, and now she's saying, perhaps he was right, I'm married, I'm in now a productive member of the dystopian society, and perhaps I too have a bug.
Mm. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, it's sort of like framed through like a diary entry, pretty much. She's like writing it as such for the most part. So, if in terms of score, first of all, full disclosure, this is a story I randomly found in like searching best horror short stories in the past like 10 years or so, something like that. So I've never heard of the author, I wasn't familiar, but I picked this one again like sort of out of a hat from whatever choice they had. And given that, I like the dystopia angle of it a lot, and we'll speak a little bit more about that in a few. But given that, for the plot, I was pretty engrossed throughout. Like, it's a longer story versus some of the ones I've been doing recently. Mm-hmm. So I think that went a long way for allowing the author to have the room to flesh a lot of it out. So I'm looking at a pretty solid 3. Any weak points, I think, might go to other questions. But plot-wise, I think it was very nicely cut up, very nicely paced. And I think if we used to cut it up, there were very distinct 3 acts. So in that sense, I'm going to give it a pretty strong 3 because I was following along pretty closely throughout.
I agree with that. I really liked a lot of parts of the story. There were very visceral descriptions of a lot of things that were going on throughout. And yes, that's going to play into what I say about this story or style.
Sure.
But it definitely helped move the plot. And it definitely helped to, keep the story going. I loved like the summer camp feel of this,
right?
Despite the
it's
fact
kind of
that
a slow roll. In fact, yeah.
Despite the fact that you, I guess, fairly quickly, not right in the beginning, but you fairly quickly understand that
it's not immediately obvious, but
something is not quite right here, and this isn't like a normal summer camp. I love the parental figures.
Mm-hmm.
You have to pick 2 objects that represent your parents.
Yeah, it's a clever pun.
The main character has like a lamp and a plaque, I think.
Yep.
As her mother and father. So yeah, it's a story that throws a lot of interesting stuff at you. But it doesn't get bogged down in it.
Yes.
And it continues throughout its telling in a very entertaining way.
What I really liked about this work, and perhaps this isn't necessarily going to the narrative aspect, but into like themes or style, but they do a good job of having a dystopian world where the protagonist is believable in her analysis of everything being normal. The only reason she's looking at things as being like abnormal is either through her interactions with C, who is the only character really in this who at all thinks
She's like
anything
the
is
Cloud
strange.
Cuckoo Lander, like you said, the Manic Pixie Girl. Yeah.
But again, like she's the only one questioning like why society had to be this way, and she then forces the protagonist, whose name I forget,
Tisha, I believe.
Tisha, to reflect on her own existence, and then occasionally she'll make comments like she's not happy with her parental figures, or like why do I have to choose a blue lamp type thing, and but again, a lot of it's normalized. It's not worthy of note for Tisha to explain it. And I would say, if anything, I have a problem with the story is that it almost gets bogged down exposition in the middle when they really start explaining things, I guess, as she's growing up. But I don't think it ever reaches the point of being
overbearing.
Yes. Yeah. It gets back into her, actually transfers from C's story to Tisha's story.
To her journey quickly enough
to allow it.
No, so does that mean what are you giving it?
I think I'm going to give it a 3.
I'm going with a 3.
I agree. I have something to add, but I think I'll wait for another later question because what I have to say about what you just said applies to a later question. So I'll wait for that. But so it looks like 3s for plot for all of us, and we'll go to themes with you, Steve-O.
This shares a lot of themes with a lot of dystopian stories, like kind of the how much free will is actually yours, how much of your personality is nature versus nurture, that type of thing. And like for most people in this book or in this short story, they go along without asking questions, but there's something different about C that causes her to ask questions, and that causes ripple effects throughout her friend circle that cause them to, question what's going on. I think that's a really, it does that quickly and fairly subtly, and then you start to see the ripples of what's happening, and people start questioning. Tisha starts questioning her parental figures, and the woman at the end, I forget what her name is, who
Katie,
gets pregnant,
or Max,
and then every time she throws up, they make her come in because the idea is they're worried that she's thrown up her bug, right?
Right. So it introduces that possible paranoia aspect.
Right. And the paranoia is another important part of
exactly
of the theme.
That was my major one, but go on.
You don't know what is real and what is, or you don't know if what you're being told is correct or what you feel is correct, right? And it's a lot of that goes on here. So
I kind of disagree with that assessment of how much of an impact she had the majority of the people, because I think people followed her because she was the rebellious girl. And because Tisha was the only one to actually have seen the bug, and at a point she's even questioning if she had seen that, or if she had bought into C's kind of rebellious nature. Mm-hmm. And it's only when she's rather dissatisfied with her life that
it hits her harder.
Because now she's wondering what could have been, in a sense. So, I don't think people are necessarily questioning their world. I think it's a wonderful look at that we tend to accept things at face value. For instance, when they describe how every few generations, all of them go to the army.
Every other class or whatever.
It was 2 classes out of 4, I think, going to the army, right?
Yeah.
So, and her look at that, Tisha's look at that was not necessarily of would be more of how I reflect war in our society. Mm. We shouldn't necessarily be doing this. We should put those resources elsewhere. I don't think she's questioning her society. I think she is making the kind of observations and own judgments that people do in their everyday life.
I don't think that she's questioning her society. Actually, that's not true. I do think that she is questioning her society to an extent, especially in retrospect, right? Through the telling of this story. But I think more so, I think it's the author putting out, making this point of view obvious through how most of the characters in this story question what's going
I see what
on.
you mean.
And like that's kind of, I mean, you see that a lot, especially in, like I said, in dystopian stories. That's what you see is like, because everyone is just going along, that's your point made, right?
And like, obvious, like in a way, in most I think dystopian stories, we'd be following C, and the obvious pun there with her being able to see what's going on. And I don't know.
C is the
Well, it's short for Celia, but you certainly get that effect. 100%.
There's an obvious effect.
Yeah, no,
there.
I agree with you.
But overall, like I think it's a well done dystopian for the facts that you just brought up there too. But the idea of how we don't even need education camps. We kind of do that in our everyday lives.
Sure. Well, we have schools.
Yeah, I mean, so you guys are giving it both a 1 for themes?
Yes.
Yes.
So here's my like addendum to all that. I agree with a lot of you guys said, and like even though you sort of like wavered back and not wavered, but took two different little angles. I'll say this is, and I often make this comparison, but I couldn't help it in this one. It's Philip K. Dickian in the sense that it's paranoia for one. See, sort of representing that, like, right? If you're raised in an authoritarian dystopian society, then of course they're gonna try to stamp out any like questioning of that, and like this is the way it is. So you're living in this society that you've accepted, like you're being raised to accept, what the camps, essentially the summer camps, essentially are doing to the younger generation in this dystopian thing. So it also feels like, because of that, it feels like it was from 2014, yeah. So it feels like a sort of like a YA, like in that big range of like, I feel like this story could have been expanded into a book, and it would be like somewhat addressing all those things. But I'm not saying it did it badly. In fact, I think Sofia did it quite well. It's just that you've seen a lot of it in and around this time, but that because it's sort of a timeless theme to address, especially like in this circumstance.
But I see this, so like I like that the diversion that this story takes is like if you see this as like a YA novel, C is your hero, and she doesn't just go away. She doesn't just get disappeared, right? She like rises up and fights the power.
Sure.
That's not what happens in this story. And like, so I see this as more in line with like 1984 than I do with like new dystopian YA novels and stuff like that.
So I was tying that in. I was about to get to that, but you're right. I do agree. It's that it's both of them in a sense. Like it feels like a new, like a shiny new, like YA-ish, like again that new generation, but also the way it's presented, the way the actual plot shakes down, and the themes is that it's boot stamping on human face forever. Yeah. Like it's a downer ending, pretty much.
It felt like somebody got sick of seeing all these YA dystopian novels where the kids won. You're like, so guess what? They don't win all the time.
Again, I don't know if this was intentional, but like I took it because of that, Steve-O, like say 90% through until the ending. It's almost like a subversion of your new like YA, like heroics who rise up against dystopia and win, right? Like no, whatever authoritarian, like again, oppressive society is happening is still, so it's keep going. So,
yeah. So you aren't special. You aren't the one who's going to rise up. You're just going to watch the person who
propagating.
Did have the ability to change things get carted off,
right?
And you're going to continue buying stuff and going to war.
buy, consume, obey, and stay asleep, etc. Yeah. So yeah. So I think
we should have put that one up.
Yeah. Well. Yeah.
Damn it.
Oh, well, imagine that the John Carpenter thing is up there for those of you who are watching us. Regardless, let's move on to Antagonist, and that's To Me. So it's sort of like we covered a lot of it kind of just now within themes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the oppressive, like, again, if you are able to manipulate your culture and society into believing one certain kind of thing and, like, preventing them from questioning your rule over them and molding them to how you would like them to be, whatever, like, fits your needs as a government, as the ruling body, then yeah, like it's going to be kind of effective. While they're rather faceless, like you could say, like maybe some of the counselors who are there, like ostensibly, like again, it's set up like a summer camp. It's like, oh, the counselors, but actually they're like trying to like keep an eye on everybody, like making sure they're obeying.
But I think they're just like cogs.
They're more you're right, exactly. That's what I'm getting to. There's certainly that.
It's cogs all the way down.
Yeah. So like they're just like a symptom of the greater disease of dystopia, really, in a sense. So again, it fleshes out a little bit more, and again, I'm going to speak to that a little bit more later on, but nevertheless, I'm calling it, again, a faceless antagonist, but not quite an abstract one either. But I think it's always, like, there's a reason dystopia fiction has been written since the time of Orwell and before and up until this very day, is because of that, because it's always a possible threat within any culture and society and civilization. So
Yeah.
I think it's just always going to be effective, and I think Sophia did a good job here in portraying hers.
I think we're in more trouble when we don't see dystopian fiction than when we do.
Yes, perhaps that's a good point. Yes.
But yeah, no, I completely agree. Like the faceless, government or whatever
Big Brother, essentially, whatever you want to
is
call it.
always going to be, for me, a very effective antagonist and very scary. It's a thing that you can't. How do you fight that? Like, what do you do when
Exactly.
everything in society is stacked against it? When everything that you cling to for who you are and how you came to be is stacked to keep you from like falling out of line,
Right.
from getting out of line.
Trapped in your own little
And
blinders.
It's a strong one for me for an antagonist, I think.
And I mean, summer camp Big Brother
Yeah.
is
A horrifying
the most
combination.
insidious of Big Brothers.
Yeah.
So I'm giving this a 1.
All right, very nice. All right, E, so go on with protagonist.
Just how do you stop that, Steve-O? You have to become Jason Voorhees.
That's absolutely correct, by the way.
But the protagonist is
Tisha.
who was very unaffected protagonist for a good portion of this work until she's developed more later on. And I ended up really liking her, and when she had her moment of realization, and it's you go from the wonder of childhood and this like her analyzing Celia or whatever it was,
See.
and then her becoming an adult and giving up on all that and marrying her summer camp lover, and
Sure.
and then it for sure the final breaking point of her unfulfilled life. It was, and just watch other people also crumble in that
Like around her that
life.
she still is with.
I don't know. I believed the transitions throughout this, and so I might give it a 1 for that.
Now, this one I was a bit not struggling with, but wavering upon. Like I have 0 default / question mark as my initial feeling, is because of what you said. Like, for the large part of the story, she's more or less a framework. Yes, she's characterized. Yes, they draw out some of her traits and some of her inner thoughts, for sure. It's just that for a lot of it, it just wasn't enough. It was almost like a mirror reflecting upon back like her experiences. And then, yes, at the very end, say 20% of the story, then she starts having some kind of self-reflection and societal reflection as well, as we mentioned. So that went a long way to sort of filling out the gaps at the end. So I wasn't sure if it's enough. So you know what? I'm going to pass it to you, Steve-O. What do you think? What do you got on this one?
So I enjoyed her as a protagonist. I liked the scene in the bathroom takes up the first third of this
Sure.
story, and I really liked her reflect, because it's her talking about it as it happened in the past, which you don't know at the time, but you realize that she is writing in C's journal, and finding that out makes her character a lot stronger. She's looking back on her inability to make a choice. She can't throw up that hard or whatever she says, and I really like that. Looking back on the story is her reflecting on her own inability to be as strong as her friend was, right? And this is her seeing that if she had done something, perhaps she would have been carted away
in the same way.
Yeah. Or perhaps if enough of them had been as strong as C was, then they could have made a difference. And it's her reflecting on that and trying to come to terms with the way that her life is. And and yes, that is a little bit of reading into the subtext, but I think
I don't
it's
think
there.
too much. I think
But I think that's there, and I like her for that. I like her as a protagonist for that.
All right. think you might have convinced me with that. You guys both like seems to be leaning more of a 1 on this one, even though I was again a softer default. But I think given that you guys make a pretty good case that I'm going to give Tisha credit enough as a protagonist, since of course it's filtered like you said, it's a diary. And another little detail, Sivo, is that it's C's diary, but it's her diary was her mother figure, like the parental like stand-in that they make the kids choose. So yeah, you know what? I think I'm going to give it a solid 1, maybe soft, but still 1 at the end of the day. You guys the same?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
All right.
I'm going to give it a 1.
All right, so let's move on to secondary supporting characters with you, Steve-O.
Now, supporting, I'm not sure about this one.
Really?
There are interesting... I mean...
Go on.
Here's the thing. I probably should have mentioned this in the last question, but it's just now dawning on me that C, to me, is kind of a protagonist in this. If she's a supporting character, then it's a strong one.
That's all right. That was going to be my case, so that's how I'm looking at it.
I don't know.
See, may I just jump in for one moment? The thing is, all this is we have no idea what C is actually like.
Right.
We have no idea what the privy to her like inner thoughts. Everything is a reflection through Tisha. So again, I don't think C can be a protagonist. Like C is a protagonist in Tisha's life, but to the story,
right? Exactly. That's how I look at it.
Tisha.
Okay.
That's pretty much my argument too, Steve-O. My case here.
I will accept that for the cause of this podcast. I think I really do want to think about that more, but I will accept that. And if that's the case, it's supporting has to be a strong one for me. I really like C as a character. There aren't really other characters that I really cared about all that much. Like there's the one woman that gets pregnant. Their one friend from camp that gets pregnant. There are a couple of counselors and, some of the other girls that are in the bathroom with them, but, none of them are super standout except for C. I don't know if you guys disagree with that.
No, I mean, I was going to back up Ian's case and sort of maybe try to convince you if you were wavering, is that C is the most important supporting character. So that has to be a 1. And yes, her other cadre of the group of girlfriends who were there during the camp, and some of them remained in touch. Of course, C sort of gets dragged away in a bus, more or less, because of her questioning and rebellious nature and trying to fight against the supposed conspiracy, which is implied to be she's probably right. We'll get to that though. But nevertheless, is that I think she was well drawn enough. C, that is, and everyone else was yes, they're not quite prop Steve-O or furniture as we might like to say, but not quite beyond that either. You know what I mean?
Right.
So all them collectively flesh out the world, but certainly C herself, I think, is the most important and, in fact, a catalyst character for the protagonist, for Tisha. So I think that's why I'm going to give secondary a 1 on this front.
Poor Jody.
Yeah.
All forgotten.
It was Jody the counselor?
The counselor, but
the perky counselor.
Who was the guy counselor? I forgot.
Hunky something.
Duncan.
Hunky Duncan.
How could you forget? Hunky Dunky, man. Anyway.
Jody, besides being a somewhat fleshed out character, was also a timestamp for the progression. Because if you notice, the protagonist, I'm never going to get her name correct.
Tisha or Tisha?
Yeah.
It's only referenced twice.
Her opinion of Jody changes quite a bit throughout the story. And you can actually see when she rejects Jody as, in the sense of the babysitter, and begins to kind of dislike her. And then, again, you're just seeing every single one of these characters through the eyes of...
Sure, it's her perception.
And not an over time as well. It's there's 2 timelines running together.
Well, not all of them over time, but some of them.
Well, no, because it's when Tisha's writing...
I see what you mean, yeah.
And she's writing about certain events in the past So some of them coincide, some of them are reflections.
No, you're right.
It's a really neat mechanic, and that goes into style. But I think, again, the characters play a role of both shaping the world, giving you hints at the time frame of things happening, and give you a look into the protagonist's
her reflection,
worldview and personality.
No, I pretty much agree. That's well said. So does that mean we're all giving secondary A1? I believe
think
we
so,
are.
yeah.
It's basically Westworld.
Yeah,
What I'm saying.
kind of. Well, that will bring me to dialogue. So this is I'm going to just bring this up now. Shall I, because of the nature and the framework of the story, it's a diary. So we're privy to just like many internal thoughts. In fact, the whole thing is all her internal reflection, as you just said, like through like her reflecting how she felt at the time and then how she feels now about all the events.
But there are lines of dialogue, right?
Yes, I know. But we've had this, I'm saying we've had this like roadblock before in that like when a story is written within this style and this nature, like this using this framework, shall I count every single word written as indeed internal monologue dialogue in quotes, if you will, or should I just go by the interactions?
I don't. I go by actual dialogue,
Because that's going to change my
between characters.
It's going to change my score a bit because again, while it wasn't bad, like if the spoken lines when C was talking to Tisha and then Tisha's talking to Max and whoever else and Jodie's little like perky speeches that she was giving, like they're fine. Yes, they are relevant to like giving you an idea of who these characters are, who the side characters are, at least her friends and like people surrounding her at the time and 20 years, however long it was later when she reflects upon them. But I don't know if they're like much standout. Like they're almost, again, this is going to sound backhanded, but they're somewhat exposition-y in a sense, to a degree, at least to me. So if I only count that, it might be like a soft default 0, but anything else, if I take away credit here, everything else goes back into style for this. So that's how I'm viewing dialogue now. You guys, I submit to you. What do you think?
I would love to read this again. I think that I'm reluctantly on your side, Scott, but only because I've only read this once. Sure. I have a feeling that there's a good amount of subtext in the dialogue that I just didn't catch the first time because I didn't know the story.
I mean, and you mentioned that earlier, so there might be more of it, you're saying.
Like, I don't know if that's the case, but I have a feeling that that's the case. And I would love to read it again and just see if that is true. The dialogue doesn't strike me as, like, incredibly memorable.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming from, too.
And, I kind of read this briefly, and I wasn't, like, studying it for
sure
little things.
But nevertheless,
I was just giving it a first read through. But so like, I would love to read it again and see if there is that subtext there, because this is the type of story that should have in lines of dialogue, if not in every line of dialogue, at least in some of the dialogue, they should be talking about more than one thing at once, right? Like right. I would think. Sure. And it probably is in there. I just didn't catch it the first time. Sure. So I'm probably going to give it a 0, but if I read it again, I might change that.
So like an asterisk star 0? Sure. What about you think?
You have to puke it up, said C. You have to get down there and puke it up. I mean, down past where you can feel it, Bracket.
Those are the opening lines.
Bracket. It sounds stupid, she nodded. But that's because it's something we can't imagine. We don't have the tools. Our bodies don't know how to calculate what we're missing. You can't know till you get there. And at the same time, it's where you came from. It's where you started.
Yeah. I mean...
It's dialogue.
So what do you think?
My opinion was actually shaped when you guys were talking about how I remember a lot from this work, and a lot of it impressed me. The dialogue, I don't remember it ever being bad, but it's not what I remember from this.
Right, there's at least standout part, I guess. So I want to say.
I'm actually going to be harsher on this because it's so good elsewhere.
So you're giving dialogue a 0 as well.
And just to be fair, on that little bit of dialogue that you read, I think that there probably is more to it than just surface on that.
Given what you just said,
it's C talking about like where you came from, right? And like in light of the rest of the story, that's the very beginning of the story. In light of the rest of the story, that plays a little bit differently. Mm-hmm. But that notwithstanding, without reading the entire thing again, I'm going to stick with the 0 on this.
Sure. All I'm going to say is it's not like we do like double 3, 4, 5 readings of a story review. You get your impressions, and like, yeah, I do see what you mean though, Steve. Certainly, you probably can see more aspects to it if we were to read it again. But nevertheless, upon my initial reading, that's how I felt, and I think we're somewhat all falling in line with that. Even though, given what you said, you might be able to get a little bit more out of it upon subsequent read-throughs. All right, so zeros around for dialogue, just for that sort of soft zeros, kind of, but nevertheless. All right, so let's move on to a good one. Style with you, E.
Oh, I've talked a lot about it already.
Yeah, we've danced around it. And we said
different
some things.
timelines, the realization of the dystopian world, phenomenal. I guess I'm going to talk a little bit about that dystopian world. The parental figures was such a good pun and such an interesting idea.
I knew you'd
and
like that.
I wouldn't say it's a throwaway idea, but it seems like such a weighty device that is a part of this world and an important part. I mean, like, they have people, like, they have rules in that society. You don't touch another person's parental figure.
Right.
And nothing ever amounts, but not in a negative way. It's just like a fact of life that they...
Exactly.
Yeah, and they do that with a number of things, like the way the jobs work. This is a very creative story, and this is a very creative world that has been built, and with such a short time, they did a lot with it. So I'm going to give this, on the realization of that world alone, a 1.
I agree with a lot of that, and yeah, like I alluded to it before, and I think we all did that. The world building was quite well done, given that it's a smaller frame, like a smaller span. Like, again, if it was expanded to a full blown like novel or series, even they could flesh that out a lot. But yeah, they sort of drop it in there as like an offhanded detail, but that says a lot about like the world that's been set up. And yeah, like, and then when she. When Tisha says like, we go into food services, like that means I guess that's their job. Like that's what the government told them to do, right?
Yeah.
Or whoever the ruling authority figures are. So like that, I think again, it goes a long way that these details could have been fleshed out, but the fact that they almost weren't sort of like implies a lot more than if they were. And so any exposition-y things like service that, so they don't feel exposition-y as much as they could have been or would in a different story. And like I said, I really like the framework. It's almost like Diary itself from Palahniuk back when he was good. That like, like it's a good like again like mechanic, the device to use because you can get your character like you get a lot of angles out of your character that way, and a lot of other characters too. So I'm gonna give it a lot of credit on all that front. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was again just very it flowed perfectly nice. I say this a lot, but in this story specifically, the flow was excellent, and I never was broken from it. And I was again like every sentence like, oh, I want next one.
Yeah. I agree with everything you guys have said. I love how it played with time and memory.
Mm-hmm. Good call.
The entire thing is a memory written in a diary, you know. And I loved that it took all these like standard dystopia tropes and just tweaked them and like made them like its own, right? Like,
exactly.
You mentioned the parental figures thing, like that's something that I've never seen before or anything really like it. And it's like, but it, you know, it's a standard like thing that's like, hey,
that dystopias do.
This? Yeah. What's something that we can make people hold on to, but like bend to our will, like as a government? But like I've never seen it done in that way before.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah,
you know?
I figured as a pun lover, you'd love that like little aspect
I love
of it.
Lamp.
Yeah, I love Lamp.
I love Mother Lamp.
There was that. I loved the camp aspect of it. Like there's all these like little things that are thrown in that they're just really good at it. The fact that an entire class just does one job, right? Like that entire class, whatever job you get, that's what you do. You know,
it's not quite because her husband was a delivery driver for the grocery thing.
They were all food services.
They're all in their food services.
They were all food services, like which is so.
It's like you work in the Ministry of Truth, the Ministry of Love, or whatever. Like,
I mean, it kind of makes sense. Like one class is in the army, the next class is in food service. I forget what the other one was, but there was a
and I will say, I thought you might like the detail that, like as you mentioned it earlier, that every other class, like two or three out of 5 army. Yeah. Right, and then like maybe like civilian jobs. Or
it's
like,
basically every other year army.
Necessary support jobs, then army again. Right. So like it's commentary on that. Like again, a background little detail,
and that's
was there.
Just a background detail that shows that
it says so much about the world.
There is an outside world that they're fighting against, right? And it just explains so much in so little. Yeah. I mean,
again,
one would assume
we've always been at war with Eurasia.
Sure,
sure. So it's ones all around for style, looks like.
Yes, yeah.
All right, and it'll be to you, Steve-O, with recommendation.
Yeah, I definitely recommend this. Mm-hmm. It was a very good read. It's not super duper short, but it's not too long. Probably
like
took me
20 minutes,
15,
half an
20
hour.
minutes to read, yeah. And it was just enjoyable from front to back. It's a little... The only people I would not suggest read this is if you get really frustrated coming into something in media res and like you don't know what's going on in the beginning. If you need to have something explained to you from front to back, don't watch it or don't read this. But it is going to be a little confusing at first. Stick with it. It's a really good story and it's enjoyable throughout. Like you don't know exactly what's going on, but that doesn't mean that the story doesn't flow and make sense as it is.
And it pays off the mystery enough.
And it absolutely does pay off. So I'm going to give that a 1. Very strong.
I actually strongly recommend this. I really enjoyed, especially of like the recent stories you've done. This is the one I like think back most fondly to. Yeah, the only one I wouldn't recommend it to are people who enjoy summer camp.
Fair enough. I mean, yeah, technically I did recommend it, but in this case, it was something I was not familiar with. And like I said, I sort of like randomly crap shot it and see what came up and chose one also at random. And I'm glad I did choose this one that, yeah, if anyone says like, hey, have you read any good like dystopian little short fiction recently? Like, yeah, this one, check it out. And we'll absolutely put up a link as well because it is one of a better one that I've read recently and I quite enjoyed it. I thoroughly was impressed by it and I'll absolutely recommend it. And I'm glad we found it. Dystopian is, yes, and granted, that's going to be sort of my bias, but nevertheless, when I can look and see and say this was a well done dystopian little tale, and I liked it.
Dystopian short stories, that is his bag, baby.
Yep, exactly.
Well,
That's my job. McCann, they're going to give me that job.
It's a nice polished dystopia.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah,
As most dystopias, as dystopias should be.
Yeah, exactly.
indeed. So I think that'll do it. So I will give out the final scores. Looks like we all gave it one time easy for me, fellas. We all gave it a 9 for the same exact reasons as well. So it comes out to a 9, in fact. And I think that's pretty solid. Yeah, this is one of the stronger stories, like I said, that I've read recently. And yeah, give it a read. It's fucking awesome. And I might check out Sofia Samatar, I believe, or Samatar, perhaps. I might check out some more of her stuff because she very much she got me with this. So I think that'll do it. Any final thoughts? Anything else? No? All right. Well, this has been Lost Signals Literature Reviews. Thanks for joining us. I've been Scott Thurlow. I've been here with Jonathan Ian Manzer.
I'm glad that our camp chose podcasting.
Or that's the one they gave you. And Stephen Amosi.
And I want to know which one of these kids becomes the Blue Beetle.
That'll be in the sequel. Good night. See you next time.
Matsu About Nothing. Matsu About Nothing. Music by Chris Morgan.
Editing and engineering by Jonathan Ian Manzer.
Matsu About Nothing.
This has been a Lost Signals production. All rights reserved.